This year, I didn't even bother responding to the annual January 1st Nintendo Switch 2 videos. It was crazy seeing RGT85 and ReviewTechUSA and all these other no-name channels do exactly what they did last year. Do the exact same thing. Oh, Nintendo Switch 2 is coming this year. Oh, the Switch is on the way out. Let's forget that we haven't had a Nintendo Direct this year. Let's forget that we have plenty of games coming out in the first couple of months of the year. Let's pretend that these leaks are legit. That we have all these things to talk about when it comes to the Switch, when in reality they don't know anything. It is the exact same thing they did last year. Apparently, because occasionally they hit gold and they get like twice the amount of views they usually get. But my point is clear, right? These Nintendo Switch 2 rumors are clickbait, right? They're not based on any hard facts. They're not based on any hard statements by Nintendo. If anything, Nintendo has given statements against the idea of Nintendo Switch coming out Switch 2 coming out in 2024, right? There's all these reasons not to take these people seriously, especially since they've been bleeding about new Nintendo hardware since like 2018, right? The Switch 2 thing is AstroTurf, right? The Switch 2 thing is an attempt at getting the highly successful, highly lucrative, most successful gaming platform on the market, Switch out of the way so these people can start doing their Nintendo conspiracies again, right? So they can start trying to pretend that Nintendo is on the way out and return to how things were 10 years ago with the Wii U or whatever. They desperately, desperately want to return to those times because then they can talk about Nintendo all they want without being expected to actually have to play the games, right? Nintendo's not producing anything good. Oh, their hardware's terrible. Oh, man, they're never going to succeed again. They fell off, right? You can kind of see the early stages of that when it comes to some of these Nintendo Switch videos. I just saw that Review Tech USA was attacking the Switch 2 storage. Really, bro? If the Switch is any indication, you can just expand the storage if you want, right? Like, there's nothing stopping you from just getting the biggest capacity storage card on the market and then just inserting it into that bastard, right? That's what I did with the Switch, right? Like the alleged lack of storage space on the Switch was a relative non-issue for me, right? And I remember when that was a big deal for that console, right? It's the same thing we always see, people crying about the power of the console, relative non-issue. And if anything, that's a positive aspect because other consoles are too overpowered and lead to the hardware manufacturers not being able to make a profit off of them. You're seeing people complain about the games, the third-party games. GTA is not coming to Switch. In an era where cloud gaming is becoming more and more common, in an era where hardware power doesn't really matter the way it used to, I would be shocked if GTA 6 does not come out on the next Nintendo console at some point. Um, complaining about alleged hardware failures, complaining about certain games, right? The narrative will continue perpetually, right? There will never be a point where these people will actually turn on the camera, look you straight in the eye and said, Nintendo is doing the best out of the three hardware manufacturers right now. They're not going to do it because they know that the instant they do, they're going to lose all their viewership. You've seen what happens when I come out and do that. How everyone aggressively comes after me when I bring up the possibility that Nintendo is better than other companies. Well, actually, I state it as a fact, but even simply thinking about that is unfathomable to them, right? To the gaming community, hating Nintendo is their religion, right? It is the most important thing to their identity in existence, right? This is the thing that gives them legitimacy. This is the thing that gives them credibility. This is the thing that makes them serious gamers. Is that like looking at Mario and Zelda and saying that like, oh, that's for babies, right? That makes them cool. That makes them sophisticated. That makes them like, cultured gamers, even though it doesn't, right? But in their mind, it is. Like, that's exactly what happens. And these non-gamers, right? These people who like use the gaming community as a tool to like pretend that they're highly successful, sophisticated individuals, like these people will, hype up the gaming PCs. They'll hype up Valve. They'll hype up Cyberpunk 2077. Like they'll do anything but admit that Nintendo is a good company, right? And that's why they constantly have to do this thing where they pretend that Nintendo is playing catch up, right? Over the past couple of years, there's been this persistent narrative that Nintendo Switch is on the way out, that it's failing, that it can't succeed, competing against the PC, the PlayStation, and the Xbox. But in reality, it's the other way around. Then Zelda was either the second or best-selling, the absolute best-selling game of 2023, right? It was up there, right? There were very few games that did better than The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. But what was the persistent narrative, right? That it failed, that it bombed, that it didn't do very well. And then meanwhile, Hogwarts Legacy, which is its primary competition, like that did get a release on Switch. After so many people came out and complained and like about that version of the game, right? Like the reality is the narrative that these high profile games cannot release on Nintendo consoles is not true, right? Like more and more we're seeing that. And the industry's attempts at like sabotaging the Switch, Capcom putting out like nothing on the console, Square Enix failing, Activision has in the Switch's entire lifespan, Activision has not put out a single Call of Duty game on Switch, right? Like after doing all of that, this crazy, crazy action to try and downplay this console, right? Throwing everything they have at the PS5 and the Series X, like, and the PC, like, it's just collapsing, right? Like, it isn't sustainable in the long term. And we're seeing that more and more. People are not necessarily buying $70 games, especially for smaller properties, right? People are not like biting when it comes to the Xbox and the PlayStation 5. And yet we're supposed to believe that Nintendo is on the way out, that they're doing badly, that they're on the verge of like releasing new hardware that will immediately release the Switch. Like, no, it simply isn't going to happen. The Game Boy Advance was supported a long while after the DS released. Like it was still getting games until like 2006, right? Probably a little bit longer than that, right? Like I was seeing Game Boy Advances for a long time after that, Like the Game Boy Advance was very, very successful for what it was. Nintendo would be insane to drop the more successful Nintendo Switch like a rock and then like replace it with something else this year, right? That doesn't make any sense. Like my assumption, looking at like the way the market is right now, is that Nintendo would, when they introduce new hardware, they would be in a good position to simply keep supporting Nintendo Switch for like 5 to 6 years, right? There's no reason to like shut down the eShop. There's no reason to stop producing new Nintendo Switch games. There's no reason to stop producing Nintendo Switch hardware and keep selling it, right? Assuming the new Nintendo hardware is a new unique gimmick, not simply a Switch 2, which is another thing that I have an issue with these people, is that like they believe Nintendo is simply going to do the same thing again. With the new Nintendo hardware on the coming out, like it's possible that it's going to have a new unique gimmick, and if that's so, the Switch will still have a place in the market, being with its unique gimmick of being a handheld and a console, right? So I think like it's possible for the Switch to continue being relevant as like a primary handheld thing if Nintendo like focuses more on like a home console thing or something like that, and then like if you buy games digitally, you can like go between the two platforms or whatever. They've talked a little bit about that, how they want to like have people be able to switch their games between consoles and stuff like that. Like it's typically been talked about when in regards to virtual console games and stuff like. But like, my point is that like my belief is that the Nintendo Switch will coexist with the next Nintendo console to some capacity, right? And then like maybe several years down the line, the Switch will get like a proper upgraded sequel like after that. But like my belief is that the new Nintendo hardware is going to be radically different than the Switch. It's going to be something that's going to have a new feature that's going to be radically different than what people are expecting, and I expect the Switch will continue to be supported. I think that people are completely off base when they talk about how Switch is on the decline, how the sales are going down, how it's not like able to compete because that obviously isn't true. Looking at how well all of these Switch games have done this year, it's just the idea that they're failing is just plain laughable. I it's certainly possible that we'll get new Nintendo hardware this year. It's possible we might get a Switch replacement. Like, I'm certainly not going to hedge my bets before we see the a new Nintendo Direct, right? Like, there might be like some signs in the near future that it's coming out at the end of the year, but this is the common trend for these people. Like every single year is that they constantly cry that like new Nintendo hardware is coming when there's really no evidence for it, right? They do this every year at this point. And for me, it's just like, why can we not talk about like the Nintendo games that we know are coming out? Like, why is no one talking about like another code, trace memory? Why is no one talking about Mario versus Donkey Kong? Why is no one talking about Princess Peach Showtime or Unicorn Overlord? Why is no one talking about like everything else that's coming out? Like why are we in this like mindset that like we have to keep being excited for new hardware that doesn't exist yet? It's something I've always had a lot of contempt for, but um, going into 2024, like these people are legit speculating that like, oh, it's gonna be out by summer and like the Switch is gonna be gone by the end of the year, which is like ridiculous. Like it's just not gonna happen. Like the possibility for me, like I think the absolute earliest a new piece of hardware could come out is November, right? They're gonna have to like talk about it, like they could reveal it at the next Nintendo Direct hypothetically, or they could deconfirm it. Like for me personally, I don't think it really matters what happens, but like you just know that like if they don't talk about new hardware, people are going to cry about them, how they're doomed and how they're not evolving with the times or whatever. But more importantly, if they do announce new hardware, when they announce new hardware, and I do think this is the most important thing, when they announce new hardware, the people who are like stamping their feet and crying about not getting new hardware are going to turn around and say what Nintendo announced was extremely disappointing, right? That is what we're going to see when Nintendo announces new hardware, is that we're going to see a massive flip in these people where they're going to do everything they possibly can to downplay this new console or this new thing, whatever it is, and pretend it isn't what they wanted. Right, we saw this with the Switch Lite. We saw this with the OLED. We saw this with like the OLED is the best selling version of the Switch right now, and yet you'll never see these people acknowledge that. Right, they'll try to tell you the OLED was a disappointment. Right, like these people are going to do everything they possibly can to avoid having to admit that what Nintendo is doing is going to do extremely well.